Welcome everyone to the Zube lecture series. Please get a snack. We have plenty of snacks. Make yourself comfortable. We're happy to have you here at the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning. My name is Peter Dunn. I'm a lecturer in regional planning. I'm the faculty coordinator for the Zube lecture series. For those of you who don't know, the Zube lecture series was founded by Irv and Margaret Zube. Irv Zube was the chair of this department for a number of years, and Irv and Margaret together created this endowment to bring scholars to the department to stimulate and enrich our academic community in landscape architecture and planning. And so we benefit from this every week. We're very excited about our entire lineup that we have this semester. Next week, come back at 4 o'clock for Karen Christensen, whose talk is entitled, "What is a Third Place and Why Do They Matter?" I'm looking forward to that, but we're very excited today to be welcoming back Professor Emeritus Annaliese Bischoff. And here to introduce her is our own Professor Patricia McGurk.
Thank you, Peter. So probably most of you know that Annaliese was at one time a faculty member here, and she taught design studios, she taught junior year writing, and she taught landscape history, which shouldn't be a surprise given kind of the topic of her research. And since she has retired, she's been incredibly busy. She has continued on with her artwork. She has a piece right now that's at the Viridian Gallery in New York City in a show called Detritus Upcycled, which is there through September 28th. She has curated a show at the Leverett Library through October 26th of Frank Waugh's etchings of trees and mills. And she is a member of the Waugh Arboretum Committee, so she's taking advantage of her free time. So one of the projects that she worked on recently was the book, The Man Who Loves Trees, about Frank Waugh, who is the person who founded this department in the early 1900s. And that book is available for sale at the back of the room. And part of her research through all those historical archives led her to reveal a lot about the women who were part of Waugh's life and who helped him in his career and actually had probably an impact on our department. So we're looking forward to hearing all about those three women who influenced Frank Waugh and a little about Frank Waugh himself. And so let's welcome Annaliese Bischoff.
Thank you so much for all coming. It's really wonderful to see so many familiar faces and also new faces. I hope I get to meet some of you as well. It's a great honor to be back. I see a number of familiar faces, and I'm just so honored to have such a great audience. Okay, good. Now we're at and so today I am going to be sharing a lot of the information that is not in my book. So you're going to see a behind-the-scenes show today, and I hope that you will get to know 4 extraordinary individuals a little bit better by the end of this talk. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share with you the etchings, and it's through the etchings that will serve as a window into this world of these women and their relationships with Frank Waugh, how he supported them and how they supported him. So it is not at all in the book, it is quite extra, but I hope you will get to learn a lot more, not only about the founder of this department, and that is an important legacy, but these extraordinary women who have, I think, to date, truly been overlooked. Oops. This is not advancing. Oops, it is advancing. So So as you heard, I wrote this book called The Man Who Loved Trees. I have a front and back cover, and I basically chose images which were lantern slides that Frank Waugh gave us. I was destined to write this book, and it almost didn't happen, but I'm very grateful for so many friends and colleagues, my husband in particular, who helped encourage me not to give up. And so this has been a labor of love. I basically found a publisher who was a family of artists who were wonderful to work with. And so this book just came out in May. I'm delighted to share, and it's so nice to have the university store here offering sales. Just want to add that any royalty from this book this year is going to support your Waugh Alumni Student Fund. So this is a labor of love. A little bit first about Frank Waugh. He had an artistic side and a musical side, and he was often called a Renaissance man. He was born in 1869 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. His family moved to Kansas relatively when he was a toddler. He grew up most of his life out in the prairies of Kansas, McPherson County. His father really had a curiosity about plants and tested how well trees would do out there in the Kansas soil. And his father had a special interest in fruit trees as well as bushes and in ornamental trees and how they would fare well in this tall grass prairie landscape. Frank Waugh developed an interest in trees early on. That was probably through his own father. And he chose to go to study at what was called Kansas State Agricultural College. Today that is Kansas State University. And Waugh majored in horticulture and studied landscape. He had to take some time off to earn a little money, so he served some time as a newspaper reporter. And you can see his own drawing of himself, where he is entitling his drawing New Editor. He was really very happy with it. He had this artistic ability. This is kind of a sticky. I don't know if it's the mouse. It's a little sticky. Oh, okay. I guess I can just go that way. That will work. Forwards and backwards. We will get this going. Another interest that Waugh had was photography. He loved taking pictures of people. And there was a wonderful article in the Christian Science Monitor about these portraits of people. The Jones Library, Special Collections, has quite a wonderful collection of these portraits, as do we at Waugh in our special collections. So Waugh loved taking pictures of people and capturing their character. In a letter that was undated to his oldest daughter, Dorothy, he sort of wrote that he really had trouble with women as sitters. And he said, as a rule, I can't photograph women at all, not even Mama, who is his wife and Dorothy's mother. And yet, he captured this amazing photo of her with a pinhole technique, and here is Alice in the kitchen. And I think an extraordinary photograph. He did a number of photographs, not only of people, but obviously of landscapes, especially of trees. And in many of these, he included students and his family members. And he would pose them. The photo on your right is of Alice, his wife, amidst sugar maples. And this was actually published in his book, The Textbook of Landscape Gardening, in 1922. And he often had his students and fellow family members in the books that he published. he not only was a photographer, he actually was a pretty serious developer of photos, and he basically came up with his own gum bichromate process for printing. He had a very serious darkroom at home and then later in our first building for our department. I want to just give a quick overview of the geography of his academic career, because I think it's important. So he started at Kansas, that's Manhattan, Kansas, and he was an undergraduate as well as a graduate student. He got his master's as well as bachelor's degree there. And then he went on to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where he was an instructor, a professor, and then Burlington, Vermont, where he was a professor and also in charge of extension. In 1902, he came to Amherst to head up the whole department, the division of horticulture. And that's when he founded the Department of Landscape Gardening in 1903. It took him a while to get that approved. Those are his core positions. But he also had some time at Cornell under the esteemed horticulturalist Liberty Hyde Bailey. And he started a PhD program in 1899. But he quickly had his family was burgeoning, and he had some responsibilities, so he actually quit the PhD program. And he was specializing in pomology, especially plums. His first sabbatical was actually taken in Germany, in Dahlem, where he got to study with the landscape architect Wilhelm Lang. And he taught in the University of California, Los Angeles, in 1923, and he taught at Dartmouth College, both in 1929 and 1930, courses for non-landscape architecture majors. Nelson Rockefeller happened to be one of his students. It was the year before Rockefeller was getting married. He was really quite excited to build models in Waugh's class. He studied in Japan and China on sabbatical in 32. And then he had some important years when he turned 65. We started to learn how to do etchings. And he decided that he really wanted to represent trees in the medium of etching at the age of 65. And so he studied in Eastport, Maine. He went to France, to the École des Beaux-Arts, the School of Fine Arts, and in Algonquin to study with the painter Charles Woodbury in 39, the year before Woodbury died. Going backwards. At this campus, when he first arrived, his office was on the upper floor of the plant house, which is no longer with us. And he was there until 1905. We'll get this right. And in 1905, Waugh had the very first building, maybe in the country, built to house the study, a program of landscape gardening. So Wilder Hall was built. The architect happened to be from Burlington. He had known him up there, very well-known architect. And Waugh really helped work out the details. He made sure that on the first floor, there was a gallery, a museum. And in the upper floor, he made sure there was a dark room, as well as the studio space. So Waugh was really finding his way in Amherst, and he realized that his direction was going to be really in administration. And that was going to be what was going to support him and his family. And he felt that otherwise he might have stagnation and it would be the end of development. So he felt that he couldn't really be a specialist, and he had to be more a general administrator in this horticulture division within which landscape gardening he established. And so that was an excerpt from his diary, which he kept every day. And in 1908, he decided to jump into a new venture, as well as his teaching and administration and his writing. And he wound up buying, with his colleague, Fred Sears, 250 contiguous acres in South Amherst, which was very undeveloped, that would become a very experimental fruit farm. And so this is really very significant that he had this operation going. It was experimental. It was not just apples and pears, but there were crops. And he wrote a lot about this in horticultural journals. He did this between 1908 and 1927 when Sears and Waugh decided to sell this business to one of the farmhands, Pritchard, who continued the business through the 60s, who then in turn sold it to Atkins. And today, this happens to be where the Atkins Country Market is located. And on this property is also where the Applewood Retirement Community is located. And as well, the Orchard Arboretum. And this is where Edith Fagos, our wonderful visitor today, lives as well. And the Arboretum was spearheaded by Anne Kahn, who is the mother of one of our PhD students, alumnus, which is very exciting. And it's exciting to note that Waugh is connected with this arboretum through his earlier days. Today this has over 165 different trees, 65 different species, and 25 families. And now it has 3 new gardens for specialty bees. And it's really exciting to see this wonderful property, which actually is a conservation property for the town of Amherst. As well as this commercial venture experiment, Waugh wrote, based upon his experiences, in such publications as The Woman's Home Companion. And he created a kind of fictitious family. It was very much based on his own family. And he wrote about his fictitious wife, Margaret, who he really admired and had such admiration for. And here you can see the Waugh family in reality. Basically, there were 6 children, and it's really quite a singular family. Waugh had an interesting sense of humor. In the same year he was doing the experimental Bay Road fruit farm, he published a book on dwarf fruit trees. And throughout this book, he has pictures of his children, and it's his own sense of humor to have children next to the dwarf trees. His own work was important with the U.S. Forest Service, which he started in 1917. He created a plan for the Grand Canyon Village, and also was part of a collaborative report on Mount Hood, working with Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. and John C. Merriman. And he did improvements for Bryce Canyon National Monument and Cedar Breaks. This is available in our archives. He did some slides. I won't go through all of these, but just suffice it to note he was very accomplished in his time. He was tremendously influential. He popularized the landscape, and he reached people within the profession as well as quite beyond the profession. He influenced landscape architects Earl Sumner Draper, the Tennessee Valley Authority, John W. Gregg from the University of California, Los Angeles, A.D. Taylor from Ohio, and Conrad Worth of the National Park Service. Very prolific to note is that Waugh authored about 42 books, depending upon how you count them, and 300 different articles. Very significant works. He had a chapter in Mary Louise Gottheim's Landscape of Art book, where he did a whole new chapter on landscape architecture in North America. This was quite a coup to have this, and he did so many books. He wrote under the pen name of Franz Bieler, Robert Lane Wells, and John Smedley. So he would sort of have his little areas. He wrote under one name for the Women's Journal, and so he would keep his professional identity perhaps intact. And this was a way he raised money for his family, extra money. But he influenced people and was very respected at the time. He was forcibly retired in 1938 because of his age. He was very proud of his family. For his 50th anniversary of his graduation, he wrote his own kind of entry into the booklet the former students were doing. And basically, he said the most important thing in his life was marrying Alice Vail in 1892, the best, most important event in his whole biography. And then he was incredibly proud of all of his children and subsequent grandchildren. He goes on to note his accomplishments, and he basically said, Alice and I remain on the campus in the house we have occupied for 39 years, where we're beginning to feel at home. There's an etching of his home in the lower quadrant that he entitled Home Sweet Home. And this was a house right where the old public health building is now, right next to Wilder Hall, in fact. I want to just quickly note a few of his accomplishments, his recognitions within his own lifetime before I emphasize the women in his life. In 1939, the year of his retirement, he was inducted as a fellow into the American Society of Landscape Architects. And in 1941, he was awarded the George Roberts White Gold Medal of Honor by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. And that may sound like a regional award, but it actually is the highest award in this country in horticulture. It is quite a big deal. So they basically did a summary of his accomplishments. So by the time he retired, our Mass Agricultural College was renamed the Massachusetts State College. And of course, it now is UMass. It became UMass in 1947 after his death. After his death, I think the most important recognitions that he has are the creation of the Waugh the Frank A. Waugh Arboretum here on this campus. So a year after he died, in 1944, the president of the college then established this arboretum. It was a campus-wide collection of trees in Waugh's honor. And it flourishes today with 8,000 plus trees, 350 different species on 1,450 acres, supporting our landscape for learning, research, and exploration. The staff have never been better. We have wonderful stewards today, and I welcome Pam Mon, who's here. It's wonderful to serve on the Arboretum Committee. And Joanne Padalano has created a new website for this Arboretum. She has captured the spirit of Waugh on this, and she's included a quote from the secretary of Waugh's department in his time, where she's said, "There's almost a magic about Professor Waugh, his being so alive. When he walked into a room, he made everyone in the room come to life. You could tell from walking by his classroom that everyone was very interested in everything he had to say." And we had a memorial on campus. We have a tribute plaque. I believe there was a garden dedicated in 1987. And the inscription is in memory of Frank A. Waugh, the Massachusetts Agricultural College professor and department head. So this is important. It's currently kind of mothballed because Hills was taken down, and this was in front of Hills. But I had the great pleasure of working with my colleague Patricia McGurr in 2007 basically, we did a planting design for the front of Hills as a memorial design for Frank Waugh. And very excitingly, there was some installation based on these designs. I tracked down my very favorite one of all, which was by Dan Shaw, who's now working down in Springfield, because his concept related to music. And I was able to track down his conceptual plan from 17 years ago. So it's pretty thrilling that I think we were honoring Waugh with this studio then. So I took a very big dive, a deep dive into this material. And in 2019, it got a little deeper. There was an antique store that called me, because basically, you can kind of associate my name with Waugh Studies. And this woman basically said, well, I have these prints from Waugh, but I don't know what they're worth. I don't know if anyone would be interested in buying them. And I said, well, he's not Frederick Judd Waugh, who's a well-known listed artist, but I think his work's quite noteworthy. And they're not worth very much today yet. But I'd love to take a look. And so basically I went there and she was willing to sell me a certain number of them. Many of these were inside a fruit crate that was addressed to Elizabeth de Beauvois. And in this box, I'll tell you in a minute, were a lot of papers from a colleague I didn't know, but was in this very department, Ted Bacon in regional planning. So it was very exciting to come into the possession of these etchings, as I knew they were, and all these papers in this odd box. Around this time, I also discovered that the Loeb Library purchased the daily diaries Waugh kept between the years of 1923 and 1943, the very years that covered his becoming an etcher, developing these printmaking skills. Of course, the pandemic hit, and I wasn't able to go and see this collection until after the pandemic opened up. But I was able then to read the daily diaries and photograph them and put a few things together. And so in the discovery of this box was a prospectus for a book to be called Tree Portraits. This book never got published. It was going to be the quintessential book for Waugh. And here was the prospectus in this lost book, amidst the papers of Ted Bacon. If anyone's interested, I can talk a little bit about his project and the intention for this book, but you can read that later as well. What I wanted to point out was that he wanted etchings to be the preferred vehicle for representing trees. And this sort of explains why he spent so much time learning how to do etchings. So in this box, I basically inherited etchings of beech trees, a drawing of a tree that he entitled Hope. And from the diaries, what I learned was that he wasn't doing all this work alone. At his side was his wife, Alice, and she was helping in the production of these etchings. And I learned so much more about how important she was. So we'll turn first to Alice Waugh. She was born in 1871, actually not far from where Storm King is now. And her family moved to Kansas, Detroit, Kansas, where her dad was a coal merchant. Her mother died when she was 17, and she started Kansas State Agricultural College at 18. Frank Waugh was a sophomore at that point, and through his new sport of croquet, he had eyes for this woman, and basically just decided that this was going to be the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. They took surveying courses together, an entomology course, and they were married and spent almost 50 years together. The family grew. This was their firstborn, and then 2 more children. They were married in 1893 and until Waugh's death in 1943. The children had special clubs which Alice organized, and Waugh had a strong hand in this as well. Waugh created the Spielerei, which was a Saturday club to go adventuring to different mills and look at different trees, like the Sunderland's sycamore tree. But Alice created the Oak Leaf Club for the older children, and for the 2 younger children, the Lullaby Club, so they could have their special time. The family did greeting cards, which they sent out to students and colleagues, alums. And it was a very close-knit family. Alice prided herself in raising her children. After the children were gone, Frank and Alice continued doing greeting cards. And Frank dedicated one of his books to his wife Alice with a simple dedication, "To Alice Vale, she made a garden." And this was in 1930. They also gardened together, and there was a garden journal in both their hands, basically over the years. You can begin to see their 2 handwritings. But Alice was at Frank's side all the time as the family was growing. They would pose for photographs in the pyramid form. And Alice also did a diary one year. And I show this so you can sort of see her handwriting. I find it very hard to read. The family went on a trip in 1924, various forms. And Alice kept her notes of what she spent. But I think it's important to see the character of this family. When all the children were born, the 2 youngest were born in Amherst, Sydney and Albert, they formed a kind of staircase. And this is a kind of quintessential photo of the family. And when they were together, 35 years later, you can see they recreated this very same lineup with great fun. So Alice, in her own way, was extraordinary, not just as an amazing mother and wife, but she served as president and member of the Amherst Garden Club, the Amherst chapter of Daughters of the American Revolution, the Women's Club, the League of Nations Club, the Institute of American Genealogy. She was active in her church and also in town government. And of course, the vote didn't happen until 1920, and that's the first time Alice voted. With her 50th anniversary from her graduation from Kansas State, a unique degree was conferred upon her, kind of made up a degree of a master of family life in recognition of the accomplishments of her children and her amazing qualities. She was very proud and happy about this. She often is seen in the photos in Frank's books. And in the one etching where you can clearly identify her, she is on just the edge of Lake Champlain up in Burlington, Vermont. So just a figure on the landscape. But this was based on photographs, which in one book from the Landscape Beautiful, Waugh entitled "Women Must Wait." That sounds kind of pejorative, but interestingly, Frank and Alice had a team and an amazing partnership. The great-grandchildren basically give a lot of detail about how important Alice was in their lives and in the community's lives. She was very even-keeled and absolutely unflappable. And the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren talk about how there was an equality in the relationship, treating each other as equals. Interestingly, Alice, after Frank's sudden death, had to move out of that wonderful house they had been in for so many years. And she rented a room from a family on North Prospect Street until her death in 1947. That didn't faze her. She was absolutely content and proud, and she really was very happy with her life. And she couldn't have done all that she did if she didn't have some outside help. 2 days a week, the Waugh family were lucky to have Mittie Hall Anderson work for them. And here's an extraordinary woman that I just found out about this connection. This is a portrait that Frank Waugh took of, and he always called her Mrs. Anderson out of respect, that is in the special collections at the Jones Library. This woman moved to the north at age 17. She worked in Northampton a bit and had some problems, was abused, and settled in Amherst, where she made an amazing life. She was known to be good-humored and industrious, and she grew very close to the Waugh family. What I want to point out is that from her earnings, she was able to buy her own home in 1909, and you can still see this house. It's now in the registry of the National Registry. And you can read a little bit about her accomplishments. She not only supported herself and her sister, she did marry happily, and she wound up just looking after other people as well as herself. In a newspaper article, Anderson is quoted as saying, of the Waugh family, there's not a bad apple in the bunch. And she really was very fond of the Waughs. For example, the younger daughter, as she was preparing to get married, was basically told often by Mrs. Anderson, Miss Esther, your mother doesn't use this knife very often. I don't see why you shouldn't take it. And Dorothy, the oldest daughter, would say, she would also say, or this dust brush, or this pen. She was always looking after things that might help somebody else. And they would laugh a lot together. And this is a picture of the younger daughter, Esther, and her fiance. But I also wanted to point out that that Mittie Hall Anderson was very active in the church, and basically in 1910 helped found the Zion Church in Amherst. She dug the first shovelful. An interesting point I wanted to make for this talk was that she was very amused by Frank Waugh's rabbit hunting. And after her amusement was expressed, he then would give her rabbits, which she was then able to prepare for church dinners. And I think this is an important connection. I was delighted to find this just this year, and I wanted to share it with this audience. And so Mittie Hall Anderson is buried next to her husband, also in Wildwood Cemetery. And the etching I wanted to share of her that Waugh did was from 1939, and it's called Wash Day. And I think what I want to point out is the representation of the human figure captures, I think, tremendous dignity, and it is the best figure representation that you'll find in any of Frank Waugh's etchings. So there was a mutual respect and admiration. And I think this is one of the more significant etchings when it comes to human representation. If you look at some of the other etchings Waugh did, the character of the trees is bar none, but many times the figures are primitive, little stick figures. And as a transition, I wanted to point out that the oldest daughter, Dorothy, also did a portrait of Mittie Hall Anderson, and this is at the Jones Library in special collections of her working in the kitchen. And the last woman I wanted to share with you is the oldest daughter, Dorothy, who was born in 1896. She's a forgotten artist, author, and even less known landscape architect. She worked for a landscape architect for 10 years, and she was a student in the very department. So it's very early in her life, she had just a fondness for painting. Here she is painting trees in the landscape. She was sent to study at the George School, which is in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, because she was so shy. And Frank and Alice thought she might come out to her own if she were more independent for a while. And so after she graduated from high school, she went on to study at Mass College of Art. And the next year she was studying at Mass Ag, and she was studying landscape architecture. Many times we'll see photos that Waugh took that include Dorothy, but one etching that he did from this very same scene of the Tupelos on Fisher's Island does not have Dorothy in it. But you'll see no shortage of his lantern slides with Dorothy in the landscape posing. And you get to see some of the kind of family activities, the canoeing, the picnicking, and the photo on the right, basically, it was also included in one of his books when he was writing about trees. What I wanted to share was Dorothy's application for federal employment, which I was just able to get a record of. And it makes very clear this little known 10-year period in Dorothy's life where she worked for different landscape architecture firms. At the very beginning, you'll see her education, and she's known more for being a graphic artist, an author, an illustrator, an editor, but I didn't know that she worked for 10 years in the field. So I just wanted to blow up this information. She worked for H.V. Lawrence out on the Cape, then at a landscape architecture at a nursery, the Moon Nursery, which went bankrupt during the Great Depression. Then for Draper, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And you can see what she was paid each week. And then for A.D. Taylor out in Ohio, all friends of her dad's generally. Neal and Worth down in New Orleans. And she also worked for Blossom in the eastern part of the state. Blossom was a Harvard grad. But I think this is new information that is important. I mean, she went on to pursue a bachelor's degree at the Chicago Art Institute, where she created her first book. But she did amazing work for people. And so here are some of the firms she worked for: Gardening on the Cape, and then this nursery where she basically would supervise planting. She was sent down to Atlantic City for one job with this firm. And then she talks about what she did for these. Basically, she was assigned to do drawings, renderings, plans, making models, supervising planting, designing planting, and really very important, I think, new work. Here are some of the photos of the men that she worked for. And Waugh wasn't just promoting his daughter to former alums and friends in the field. He did this for all his students, and was really very supportive of their careers. So it's interesting just to point out this gap, that for all these years, Dorothy was working in the field. So I think this is a whole new area I hope some of you may be interested in looking into. Of course, what she is known for is not just doing drawings for the Park Service of recreational spaces, but her posters. And basically, She worked during the Emergency Conservation Work Program, and between 1933 and 1937, she created 17 posters for the national parks and state parks. And I just wanted to share these images, because they're really very vibrant. There is going to be an exhibit of her work in September of 2025 through January 2026 by my friend and colleague, Mark Resnick, and I hope you'll make it a point of visiting that. And Mark Resnick is working on a book about Dorothy Waugh as an unsung heroine. So here are some, we have 16 of the 17 posters that we located, and copies of these are also at the Jones Library. You can see her style is very modern, influenced by Art Deco, but very modernist in its boldness. Vivid colors. So those are her etchings. And at the same time, she did a wonderful children's book in 1943 called Warm Earth. You can take a look at a copy later. The original drawings for this are also at the Jones Library. And this is a book that Frank Waugh got to see before he died in production, Oxford Press. Really remarkable work. These are the end plates. And she even had all of the flora and fauna identified that you can find in these. So an extraordinary, remarkable woman. And in the etching, she is seen entering a boot shop in Borden-on-Water, which is in the Cotswolds. And this was from a family trip in 1924. The etching was done in 1938. And it has, I think, the great charm of the English village itself. She went on to publish 2 books about Emily Dickinson, one in 1976 and one in 1990. And remember, she was born in 1896. So I wanted to just end by sharing some information that in this box that I found, which had papers of Ted Bacon, a professor of regional planning in this department, I found out that he was also a dean at Amherst College between 1946 and 1961. And the box was addressed to Elizabeth de Beauvois, who was the resident curator of the Dickinson Homestead, which is administered by Amherst College. And she did this between 1976 and 1988, overlapping years with the time that Dorothy was writing these books about Emily Dickinson. So it stands to reason that she would have visited the Dickinson homestead often for her research. I don't know more about the connections here, and I may never know because Ted Bacon passed away, Dorothy has passed away, and so here we have this mystery that remains of whether Dorothy was still trying to get this book of trees that her father so wanted to have published, safeguarded perhaps through the homestead perhaps then given to Ted Bacon. I just don't know that. But there is a family grave, and all of the Waughs are buried in a plot at Wildwood Cemetery. And it's quite an adventure to find all of these. So I really want to thank Special Collections at the Jones Library, the Frank Waugh papers at our special collections here at UMass, the Waugh family for all of their sources, and been able to use the etchings and drawings from my personal collection. I want to thank my colleagues, especially the reviewers for my book, family and friends for all the support. I'm still on the trail to hunt down more information, but I really wanted to take this time to share the personal side of Waugh's family and his connections to the women identifiable in his etchings. I will conclude there.